Miriam knew that even looking at him was a risk. In the eyes of the church, Jonas was marked by his father's sins, a young man destined for trouble. But as the autumn wind rattled the cornstalks, she felt the rough wood of the small carving he had slipped into her hand. It was a heart, smooth and warm. She should have thrown it into the wood stove, should have confessed to her dead. Instead, she hid it deep beneath her quilts. Tonight, under the cover of darkness, the lantern would be lit, and a choice would be made that could change their lives forever. The mist hung low and heavy over the rolling hills of Holmes County, clinging to the valleys like a soft, white woolen blanket. It was early, the kind of early that only the plain people truly know. The sun had not yet crested the horizon, but the world was already awake. Inside the Miller farmhouse, the air smelled of stale wood smoke and rising dough. Miriam stood by the cast-iron stove, her hands dusted with flour, her movements rhythmic and practiced. 20 years old, she was the picture of a dutiful Amish daughter. Her bonnet was crisp, her apron spotless, and her heart was guarded. She knew her place in this world. She was the daughter of Bishop Abram Miller, the most respected and feared man in the district. His word was law, not just in their house, but for 20 families nearby. Outside, the sound of buggy wheels crunching on gravel broke the morning silence. It was market day. Tuesdays were the days the community came alive, gathering at the auction barn to sell livestock, quilts, and produce. It was a day of work, but also a day of seeing faces. Miriam wiped her hands on a cloth and looked out the window. She saw him then. Jonas. He was unloading crates of apples from a battered wagon that had seen better decades. Jonas Yoder was tall, with shoulders broadened by years of solitary labor. He did not laugh loudly like the other boys. He did not race buggies down the back roads during Rumspringa. He worked. He kept his head down. But the community whispered. They remembered that Jonas's father had left the faith 10 years ago, leaving Jonas and his mother alone. In the eyes of many, the apple did not fall far from the tree. They watched Jonas, waiting for him to break, waiting for him to run off to the English world, just like his dad did. But Jonas stayed for his mother, and lately, Miriam suspected, he stayed for something else. Later that morning, amidst the noise of the auctioneer's chant and the smell of horses, Miriam found herself near the apple stand. The crowds were thick. English tourists snapped photos from a distance, but the Amish kept to themselves. "The Goldens are sweet this year," a deep voice said. Miriam looked up. Jonas was holding an apple out to her. His hat was pulled low, but his blue eyes caught hers.
Hey.
For a moment, the noise of the market faded. "My mom needs apples for sauce," Miriam said, her voice barely a whisper. She shouldn't be talking to him alone. It wasn't forbidden, strictly speaking, but it was frowned upon. A bishop's daughter and the son of a fallen man. "Take a bushel, then," Jonas said, lifting a heavy wooden crate as if it were filled with feathers. "I'll carry it to your buggy." He walked beside her, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. He didn't speak of the weather or the harvest. As he set the crate down in the back of her father's black buggy, his hand brushed against her sleeve. It was a fleeting touch, innocent to any observer, but it sent a jolt through Miriam. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a piece of cedar, no bigger than a thimble, carved into the shape of a tiny bird. "For you," he murmured, glancing around to ensure no one was watching. "It sings no songs, but it will listen to your secrets." Miriam's breath hitched. Making images was a delicate matter in their faith, often seen as prideful. But this was a gift of time and care. Before she could say thank you, Bishop Abram's voice boomed across the lot. "Miriam, the horses are restless." Jonas stepped back instantly, his face returning to a mask of stoic calm. But as Miriam climbed into the buggy, clutching the wooden bird in her pocket, she knew the peaceful chapter of her life was ending. A storm was coming. The weeks that followed were filled with the golden hues of autumn. The harvest was bringing the community together. There were days of shucking corn and threshing wheat. The work was hard, but the communal meals were joyous. Yet, Miriam walked through them like a ghost. Her thoughts were constantly drifting to the Yoder farm, 2 miles down the creek road. She found ways to be where Jonas was. It was a dangerous game, one she had never played before. On Tuesday nights, the young Geetha youth of the church gathered for singing. Usually, Miriam sat with the other girls, singing the slow, mournful German hymns. But she began to notice Jonas standing at the back, his bass voice rumbling like distant thunder. One evening, after the singing ended and the buggies were being hitched, Miriam pretended to check a loose strap on her horse's harness. It was a flimsy excuse, but it worked. Jonas appeared out of the shadows, holding a lantern. "The strap is fine, Miriam," he said softly, the orange glow of the kerosene lamp illuminating his sharp features. "You look for trouble where there is none." "I look for you," she admitted, the boldness of her own words shocking her. She clutched her shawl tighter against the chill. "My father speaks of a match for me, speaks of Isaac Stoltzfus." Jonas stiffened. Isaac was a good man. He owned 50 acres of prime dairy land. He was safe. It was everything a bishop would want for a son-in-law. Jonas had nothing but a rocky apple orchard and a mother with a bad hip. "Isaac is a good man," Jonas said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "He can give you a big house, a new buggy. Do not want a big house." Miriam stepped closer, lowering her voice. I want a heart that understands mine." "Jonas, why do you stay?" "The others say you will leave. They say you are saving your money for a bus ticket west. They say what they want." Jonas looked at the ground, then up at the stars. "I stay because this is my home. I stay because... How could I leave when the best part of this county is standing right in front of me?" The confession hung in the cold air. It was a declaration of love, plain and simple. In the Amish world, love was shown in action, not usually in grand speeches. But Jonas had the heart of a poet, buried under layers of denim and duty. They began to leave letters. It was an old method, risky, but necessary. There was an ancient oak tree where the Miller land met the Yoder Creek. A hollow in the trunk, hidden by overgrown ivy, became their post office. Miriam wrote of her fears of her father's increasing pressure to marry Isaac. Jonas wrote of his dreams of building a furniture shop, of carving things of beauty. He wrote of a future where he could walk into church holding her hand without shame. "My father says the English world is full of temptation," Miriam wrote in one note. "But I think the greatest temptation is right here. The temptation to believe that our love is wrong just because it doesn't fit their plan." November turned to December. The snows came early, covering Holmes County in deep drifts. The letters became harder to deliver. The risk of footprints in the snow made their secret tree dangerous. They had to be careful. But love, when suppressed, grows like a root under concrete. It finds a way to break through. They grew bold. They met once in the dairy barn during a frolic, holding hands in the hayloft, while the elders drank coffee in the house. It was in those stolen moments that Miriam realized Jonas was not the rebel the town painted him to be. He was devout. He prayed with a sincerity she rarely saw in the older men who slept through sermons. He didn't want to leave the Amish, just wanted to be Amish in his own way. But secrets in a community this small are like candles in a hay barn. Eventually something catches fire. It happened on a Tuesday, 3 weeks before Christmas. Bishop Abram was looking for a misplaced ledger in the barn. He didn't find the ledger. Instead, he found Miriam's hiding spot behind a loose board in the tack room. He found the carved bird. He found the carved heart. And worst of all, he found the bundle of letters, tied with a piece of blue ribbon. Miriam was in the kitchen, canning beets when the back door slammed open. The sound was like a gunshot. The silence that followed was worse. Her mother, Sarah, stopped stirring the pot. her face going pale. Bishop Abram walked into the kitchen. He was a large man, his beard gray and long. He did not yell. He rarely yelled. His anger was cold, quiet, and terrifying. He tossed the letters onto the kitchen table. They slid across the wood, stopping right in front of Miriam. "Explain," he said. One word, heavy with judgment. Miriam felt her knees go weak. She gripped the edge of the counter. Lying was a sin. They are from Jonas Yoder, dead. Jonas Yoder. Abram repeated the name as if it were a disease. The boy whose father turned his back on God. The boy who plays with wood instead of working the land. "You are the daughter of a bishop, Miriam. He is a good man." Miriam's voice trembled, but she did not look down. "He has faith dead. He works hard. He works in secret." Abram pointed to the wooden bird. "Makes graven images. He meets you in the dark like a thief. Is this how we raised you? To deceive? To hide?" "We hid because we knew you would not understand," Miriam cried out, tears spilling over. "You want me to marry Isaac? But I do not love Isaac." "Love grows from duty and shared faith," Abram said sternly. "Was not a wild weed that springs up wherever it wants. You have brought shame to this house. The community knows a bishop's daughter is running around with a Yoder boy. My standing is gone." The ultimatum was swift and brutal. Miriam was confined to the house. She was not to attend the Sunday singing. She was not to go to the market. The letters were burned in the stove right before her eyes. Abram then went to the Yoder farm. The confrontation was not public, but everyone in the district felt the tremors. Jonas was told, in no uncertain terms, that he was not welcome near the Miller land. If he persisted, the bishop would bring it before the church, and Jonas would face the Bantha shunning. For Jonas, this was the nightmare he had always feared. It wasn't just about him anymore. If he was shunned, his mother would suffer. She relied on the community for help with the harvest, for rides to the doctor. If he was cut off, she would be isolated too. He sat on his porch that night, whittling a stick until it was nothing but shavings. The cold wind bit at his face. The English world was just a bus ride away. He could leave. He could take Miriam and go. He could wear zippers and drive cars and be free. But as he looked out over the dark fields, he knew that wasn't what Miriam wanted. She loved her family. She loved her faith. Asking her to leave would break her heart in a different way. He was trapped. Christmas passed with a somber quietness in the Miller household. There was no joy in the gathering. Miriam moved through her chores like a machine. She had lost weight. Her eyes, usually bright with mischief, were dull. She saw Jonas only once, from a distance, at the church service held at the Stoltzfos farm. Men sat on one side, women on the other. He looked tired. He didn't look at her. He couldn't. The eyes of the congregation were heavy on them both. Isaac Stoltzfus came to visit. He sat in the parlor with Miriam and her parents. He was kind in his own way. He talked of his new silo and his herd. He tried to make Miriam smile, but it was no use. She was polite, but her spirit was absent. Late one night, in late January, a blizzard struck Holmes County. It was the worst storm in 20 years. The wind howled like a wounded animal, piling snow 5 feet high against the barn doors. The power lines for the English neighbors went down, plunging the whole county into darkness. For the Amish, the darkness was normal, but the cold was dangerous. In the middle of the howling wind, a frantic knocking came at the miller's door. Bishop Abram opened it to find a young English boy, shivering and terrified. His car had slid off the road into the ravine near the creek. His father was trapped inside, hurt. "Please," the boy cried. "I saw your lantern." Abram didn't hesitate. The Amish do not ignore a neighbor in need, English or plain. "Get the lanterns," he ordered. "Sarah, get blankets and hot water." Abram and Miriam pulled on their heavy coats. They needed strong hands to help pull the man from the wreckage. They hitched the draft horses to the sled, battling the wind. But when they reached the ravine, the situation was worse than they thought. The car was tipped precariously on the edge of the frozen creek. The ice was thin. If the car shifted, it would break through into the freezing water. Abram was strong, but he was an older man. He struggled to find purchase on the icy bank with the ropes. The horses were skittish. Then, out of the swirling white snow, another figure appeared. It was a man on horseback, riding bareback on a plow horse. He slid off the horse and scrambled down the bank without a word. It was Jonas. He had seen the commotion from his window. He didn't look at the bishop. He didn't look at Miriam. He looked at the car. "The axle is caught," Jonas shouted over the wind. "Cannot pull it from the front. We have to lift it from below." "It is too heavy," Abram shouted back. "Not if we work together." Jonas grabbed a fallen fence post to use as a lever. "Bishop, you guide the horses. Miriam, hold the light steady. I will lift." It was madness. The car groaned. The ice cracked. Jonas jammed the post under the frame and threw his entire weight against it, his boots slipping on the mud and ice. He strained, his face red with effort, veins bulging in his neck. "Now, pull," Jonas screamed. Abram slapped the reins. The massive draft horses surged forward. Jonas pushed, his back screaming in protest. With a metallic screech, the car lurched free of the ice and slid up onto the safer snow of the bank. They pulled the Englishman out. He was bleeding but alive. Exhausted, Jonas collapsed into the snow, gasping for air. The adrenaline faded, and the cold rushed back in. Abram stood over him, breathing hard. The bishop looked at the young man, the outcast, the rebel lying in the snow, having risked his life for a stranger. He looked at Miriam, who had dropped the lantern and was kneeling beside Jonas, checking his hands for injuries. Abram saw the way she touched him, not with lust, but with a deep, terrified care. He saw the way Jonas looked at her, protective, gentle. There, in the howling wind of the blizzard, the strict rules of the Ordnung seemed very small compared to the size of the young man's heart. The thaw came slowly that year, but the frost in the Miller house melted sooner. 2 days after the blizzard, Bishop Abram harnessed his buggy and drove to the Yoder farm. He did not go to scold, he went to thank. He found Jonas in the barn, repairing a broken chair. "You have a gift with wood," Abram said, standing in the doorway. Jonas looked up, surprised. "It keeps my hands busy, Bishop." Abram walked into the workshop. He picked up a piece of carving, a small, intricate horse. He turned it over in his large, rough hands. "I have been hard on you, Jonas," Abram said, his voice low. "I judged you for the sins of your father. I thought you would leave us. I thought you had no respect for our ways." "I respect the ways, Bishop," Jonas said, standing tall. "But I also respect the gifts God gave me, and I love your daughter. Yeah. I cannot turn that off like a lamp." Abram nodded slowly. "The Bible says we are known by our fruits. The other night, it was a good fruit. You have a servant's heart." He placed the carving back on the bench. "I cannot change the rules of the church, Jonas. You know this. We must live plain. ... Perhaps there is room for a man who builds strong chairs and has a strong back. Isaac Stoltzfus is looking for a wife. But Miriam, she is not looking at Isaac." It was not a complete surrender, but it was an open door. The spring wedding season arrived with a burst of wildflowers. The community gathered at the Miller farm. The benches were set up in the threshing floor of the barn. The smell of roast beef and celery stuffing filled the air. Miriam wore blue, the color of a new bride. Her apron was white. Across the room, Jonas stood with the men, wearing a new black coat. He had been baptized into the church 2 weeks prior, a commitment that silenced all whispers of him leaving. He hadn't given up his carving, though. He made furniture now, simple, sturdy, beautiful pieces that were sold to support his new family. It was a compromise. He kept his art, but he used it for the community. When the service ended and the meal began, Miriam and Jonas sat together at the head table. Underneath the heavy oak table where no one could see, Jonas reached out and took Miriam's hand. His palm was rough, calloused from work. Her hand was warm. "Are you happy?" he whispered, as the sound of German chatter filled the barn. Miriam looked out at the sea of black bonnets and straw hats. She saw her father laughing with Jonas's uncle. She saw the unity of the people she loved. She squeezed Jonas's hand. "We are home, Jonas," she smiled, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "We are finally home."